let me start with that. Before I start with the introduction, I would like to mention, that we will launch the fund on September 1st. That's an important piece of information that I wanted to start with. But now I guess we can, jump straight into it. And I'd like to give you a short introduction about, what we're talking about. So, the MedTech Fund is really providing access to Shifamed's portfolio companies. It is really truly a partnership between Shifamed and the MedTech Fund, where Shifamed, with its great innovation and great, ventures, works on providing the ideas, and we help on the financing side. I'll say a short word about Shifamed. Shifamed is a technology innovation hub. It's located in the heart of the Silicon Valley, and it's really focusing on building the next generation medical devices, medical products. Okay. As you know already, and you can see also on the right-hand side of the page, Shifamed has a pretty spectacular track record, and we'll definitely say a couple of words about this, going forward in the next few minutes. I guess, from my perspective, there's really three unique selling points that I would like to bring to your attention at this stage. The first one being the very thorough due diligence that Shifamed conducts prior to launching an opportunity. Shifamed really invests significant resources in time and money to run the due diligence prior to any outside investors being called, to develop a project. This is an incredibly important part, and we'll certainly ask Amr to talk a little bit more about it. The second point that I'd like to talk about is the fast follower strategy. What Shifamed does, right, is focus on trying to improve existing technologies. For instance, you might have a technology for a medical device that is 15 years old. The idea is, how can we bring a significant improvement to that technology, right? So it really is a fast follower strategy. Finally, and that's the third and last unique selling point, is Shifamed focuses on growth segments of the market. Specifically, they focus on cardiology and ophthalmology. And I guess, you'll hear everyone telling you that they focus on growth strategy, right? The specific reason why there is such an important focus on that here is that philosophically, Shifamed wants to make sure that there's multiple potential buyers at the exit. Right? They never want to be in a situation where they're price takers. Okay, so three very important features: a very effective due diligence process, a fast follower strategy, and trying to be active in an area of the market where there's multiple potential buyers at the exit. And that really, is what explains this pretty amazing track record that you can see on this slide. I'll make it very short. Shifamed launched 6 companies in its history and sold all of them successfully to strategic buyers. So very spectacular track record. Finally, and this is my last word, currently Shifamed has 6 companies that are existing companies, right? And this is our pipeline at the MedTech Fund. Primarily, we're looking to invest into the 6 existing companies of Shifamed. And I guess the important word in the sentence is the word existing, because since these companies are at different stages, but some, are fairly close to the exit, we will have some companies that are planned to run for 3, 4, 5 years, but we also have a number of companies you can see in the column earliest possible exit. Companies that are potentially going to be sold already in 2022 or 2023. Excellent. So, this is really what I wanted to talk about, and I think I already said a lot too much. I want to now take the great opportunity to introduce you to Amr. Amr, you're here with us. Thank you so much for that. Would you please tell us a few words about you to start with? I think it's a lot better for you to introduce yourself, if that's okay.
Sure. First, pleasure to speak to all of you and address you. I won't be able to speak live to all of you, but hopefully we'll get your questions and answer as many of them as possible. So I came to the US as a biomedical engineer and electrical engineer, studied at Case Western Reserve University, and I've been, from the very beginning, really completely interested and sort of ended up devoting my whole professional life to biomedical development and research. So I started there and I got hired out of college into a company called ACS, which became Guidant Corporations. And Guidant and the products that they made is really sort of the kinds of product that have changed our industry. Their minimally invasive products at the time was angioplasty catheters, eventually became stents. And these are sold to interventional cardiologists, and they're single-use products or they're implants. And that's the industry I got into. Cardiovascular is, the majority of what we do still today. Over the last few years, we got into ophthalmology. After ACS, I joined a small startup that went public in 6 months, and that was a very interesting experience for me. Followed by starting my own company, which I sold to another startup, and a year later we had sold to Boston Scientific. We had developed the product, and I teamed up with Fred Kostravi, and that turned to be embolic protection, and the product's still in use today. Then I started a company called Sadra Medical, which is a percutaneous aortic valve replacement company that got sold to Boston Scientific. Following that, we started Shifamed, the incubator itself, and from there we sold Maya Medical, which is a renal denervation catheter and RF generator, and then we sold Kalila Medical, which is a steerable sheath for interventional cardiology, and then we sold Apama Medical, which is a AFib, also RF ablation catheter with cameras and so forth. And then the last company we sold was Nuvera Medical, which is an ultrasound catheter. This is intracardiac ultrasound. This is ultrasound in 3D real time that J&J recently bought. So we sold to Boston Scientific, Abbott, and J&J. And so what we do is, start these companies and aim to sell them to the large strategics as quickly as possible. So that's what we do. This is what I do, and that's our passion. That's really exclusively our focus and activities.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Amr, for this introduction. I think you made a very nice link to Shifamed. Would you be able to tell us, using your own word, about Shifamed? I think again here, nothing replaces you saying it.
Sure. So Shifamed is really the essence of what we're about is trying to reinvent ourselves. So early in my career, I observed how sort of the eminent folks in our industry sort of moved. And at the time when I was younger, I thought, okay, you start as an engineer, eventually you make it up the ranks and you become a CEO, and eventually you become a VC. First you go public, become a public CEO of a public company, and then eventually become a VC. I thought that was sort of the trajectory. I was looking up to people, my mentors, who sort of did those sort of things. But at one point, sort of early in my career, I realized my interest really lied somewhere else, which is really in the innovation part. And also realized that the system is challenged in certainly for me and my passion and my interest, to be able to be really good at every one of those things is not easy. And then you would have to sacrifice something. So I've decided to focus really on the innovation, and I did this because I also enjoyed that starting a company and creating the product and putting a team together and moving really, really fast and trying to sort of beat all the competitors to an exit. That whole pursuit is so exciting and so interesting and never boring that I decided to focus on it. And it's also full of challenges. So I didn't feel like I needed to go and do, be a CEO of a public company. So Shifamed is really embodies all of that. We are in the process of always reinventing ourselves, identifying what to do next. What is the next company? What is the next technology we want to develop, and why? Because I've learned certainly that first step is the most important one. You can have great technology, but if nobody's interested, if it's not the right time or the right opportunity, things are going to get challenging. So Shifamed is always in the process of identifying the next medical device company to start, and trying to do as many of those as possible. And in the internal process for us is sort of internally competitive. So we're always putting our best ideas and taking only the best of those to move them forward.
Amr, in terms of innovation, right? You almost make sound innovation as an easy thing, right? And obviously I say that because I know your history. Can you tell us a little bit about this? It seems you said, in your description, you used a lot the words innovation and competition. Can you tell us a little bit about this?
Sure. For us, innovation is, it's really about what people do, what people need from us, or the industry needs from us, is bring new technology to market. And in order for us to differentiate ourselves, we have to come up with superior products, with products that do and address solutions that have not been addressed yet. And so we come up with technologies that separate us from everybody else, and that's usually with intellectual property and patents. Often we push the edge of engineering technology a little bit. We come close to the sort of the limits, but that's what we do. And our teams are, almost completely made up of technical folks, engineers that have usually spent 10, 20 years in the industry. So, and the innovation is part of what we do. We also happen to be in Silicon Valley, where the culture is very much part of that. So we're not necessarily just by ourselves and the only ones doing this. We just focus on medical devices. But in Silicon Valley, the spirit of folks, the culture is, we want to come up with the next company, the next startup. We want to be successful, have an exit, and then we're going to do it over again. So employees, when they join us, their expectations is that activity, that project, that position that they have in that startup is going to last only a number of years, 3, 5, 6 years at the most, before they go back and do something else that's new and different. And that culture is really not everywhere, but we certainly capitalize on that, and that is the culture that we have and we want to perpetuate. Because it's very difficult for the large companies to literally do something different than what they normally do. When they're in production, when they're doing the next generation of something, they're always iterating on something they already have, for the most part. It is difficult for them, given the bureaucracy and the regulatory and quality sort of burden that they have to deal with as large corporations, for them to take risk and jeopardize the whole organization to go and do the kinds of things that we're willing to do. The way we take, sort of our innovation journey has a lot of certain amount of risk involved that is sort of contained, but it is, for the bigger companies, the bureaucracy prevents them from moving quickly. So the innovation is really what separates us, and this is what those large companies are essentially buying from us, is how fast can they get to market. And since they can't innovate as fast as we do, they end up buying companies like ours.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Now, you offered me a great transition with the word risk. Can you tell us, Amr, about the due diligence process of Shifamed? I happen to think that, obviously Shifamed does a lot of things very right, but I think, your initial due diligence process, I think sets you apart from the crowd out there?
Sure. So, our track record is 6 for 6, but the reality is we have plenty of failures. But what we try to do is fail really, really early. And this is not a novel concept, but you want to fail early in order to say, so when we look at a particular idea or technology, we dig into it very quickly. And if it doesn't work, if it doesn't make sense, when we examine either the technology or the patents or the regulatory or the reimbursement or physician adoption or any of those elements that would make a company be successful, we may abandon the project, the first few weeks, the first few months, and if we have to, the first year or so. But we do it with a few people. The teams usually in that stage are very small. They could be, anywhere from 3 people to 6 people. But they're digging deep, and it takes time. And that's sort of the tough part. Is it's time consuming, not hugely resource consuming, but time consuming. And we dig into it in a very deep way. We immediately start developing ideas, making prototypes, and filing patents. Simultaneously, we're looking very hard at the business prospects. Before we even get started, we actually we need to know and identify and assess the interest of the buyers. The buyers really, there's 2 things that allow us to even get started right off the bat. Who are the buyers, and why are they interested? Is this sort of a exciting technology they have to have in their portfolio in a few years? And then how can we do better? How can we create innovation that's protectable by intellectual property and patents? Those are sort of allows us to get started. And immediately we start to tinker. For us, this is really fundamental. You cannot really analyze your way into a new product or a new design. You can't just read about it, talk to people, and things are going to move forward. You have to do the talking, you have to do the research, you have to do the reading, you have to do the interviews, but that has to be coupled with the tinkering, the prototyping, and the building and testing of the product. So we do that with very few people, but it takes time. It takes a year, sometimes a year and a half or more. And we like to do this on our dime, because if we want to change our mind and say, look, this is a bad idea, I don't want to go back to tell the investors, look, this didn't work out. We're going to do something else. So we like to have the freedom to be empowered to shut a project down on a moment's notice when we figure out it's not the right one. And so we'll take those failures really early. By the time we're ready, by the time that we finish this process of due diligence, where we have prototypes, we filed IP, we have the business plan well worked out, we know how big the market is, who the buyers are, why would they buy, why would they not buy, who are the competitors, and so forth. There'll be a check mark against each one of those items, and that's when we go and raise money from the institutional investors and groups that we're talking about today. So this is our process. This is what we do, and that really gives us the ability to have success. So we try to reduce the risk as much as possible by going through this sort of detailed, time-consuming, but active process.
Excellent, thank you. Fast follower strategy, Amr, how would you like to tell us about it? Could you tell us maybe a few words and maybe then use a practical example to make it more palatable?
Yeah, so this was something that, when we first sold the first company and then we started looking at the success of the next one of the things that we had to figure out, or I needed to sort out, was, why was this successful? Why others were not successful? What were the ingredients? So this look back was really critical for us. And I think the realization, and that became our strategy, is the first one we did, we were not the first product to make an embolic protection filter that protects patients from stroke. But we were differentiated. We had a better technology, and we actually beat them to the commercial market. And that was really key for me. We did not take the scientific clinical risk. The scientific and clinical sort of effort has a lot of uncertainty associated with it. It has, if you succeed in that, you're first to market, and the opportunity is tremendous. And so I'm not trying to sort of state how important that is. But for us, given that we really want to scale and we want to have multiple companies and have a higher success rate, we've taken the approach of, we don't want to be pioneers in the science, but we want to take execution engineering risk. And that's something we can control. We know the market is there. We know that it generally works, or at least the world is convinced that it works. And so we developed a product that fits that need and sort of, leapfrogs the first movers, the pioneers. That's what we're trying to do. Because when we do, everything that they've done along the way, from, working with the regulatory agencies, we're following in their footsteps. We're taking advantage of the path that they've charted from a regulatory perspective, from a clinical perspective, and so forth. And trying to establish a brand new market is super difficult and has a lot of risk. So we would rather not take that risk and try to really sort of take advantage of those pioneers and come up with our own differentiated approach and solutions that they, as pioneers, really couldn't solve all the problems. So there's always problems that have not been resolved, and our job is to fill those gaps.
Great, thank you, Amr, on that. The growth strategy, I guess, this is also something that I think is, I always talk about your business instinct behind the incredibly talented MedTech entrepreneur. Can you tell us a little bit about the growth strategy and, the areas where you're willing, where you have expertise, right? But also where you're willing to play, right? I don't think you're ready to play in every part of the market, right?
Yeah, so our industry is very, or any industry is really requires a great deal of sort of domain knowledge. And in our industry, the cardiology is really the most exciting. Usually more acquisitions are coming from there. And so and this is also part of where we grew up, essentially. This is the area where we're most comfortable, as well as the ophthalmology. So those are the two areas for us. And so we don't like to jump into any new technology or any new space or domain. When we go to a new space or domain, we always bring something with us that we know. So we're always exploring new things, but we're always bringing a lot of expertise with us, so that what we have to sort of develop new is only a small portion, not everything. Starting in a new company where you're learning everything you need to learn from the first time, it's difficult. So that's too much risk. So what we like to do is go into those areas that we know really well. And so because we know them well, we know that those are areas that there's going to be a lot of support behind, where the business development teams and the very strategic companies, the big, large medical device corporations, they need to have a product in that particular category. So we know that up front, or we do that homework quickly, and we go in those areas because if we want to be catching a wave of excitement. We want to be part of the next sexy thing. We don't want to be like in a stale market, or a market that's growing very little, because in those markets the acquisition is going to be difficult to have. The large medical device corporations cannot afford to sit back and not try to be in the next multi-billion sort of industry. They can afford to make mistakes, but they cannot afford not to compete, because they have to be in the top three. Otherwise, it doesn't usually work out for them. And so when the time comes, if we have an interesting product in one of those categories, they have to step up and try to buy early before their competitors buy it. So we really count on this bidding process, on this competitive side that takes place within the large medical corporations for our acquisitions to take place. So it's a high growth areas that we're interested in, areas that we know really well, and we're always sort of pushing the next level of, we always are bringing. So for example, when we did RF, and catheters. We knew catheters really well. Then we brought RF in a way that was differentiated, and we brought in cameras to it and software. When we're doing, let's say we're doing a heart pump right now, we knew catheters, we knew electronics and consoles. We added a lot of the fluid dynamics that a pump would require. So when we look at a new company, we're doing ophthalmology, we leverage so much of what we knew about nitinol and processing and some of those tricks, and we brought them into that. So when we get into a new area, you know, we know 2/3 or we're feeling very comfortable with half of what we need to do, and then the rest is some of the new things that we have to do. Does that answer your question, Peter?
Yes, that's great, Amr. Thank you. You know, on my side, I have two more questions. I just want to take the opportunity to remind everyone that you can ask any questions to Amr over the chat function, and you can do that as well, you know, on an anonymous way if you wish to do so. Perfect. Amr, the two last questions I have is if you could please tell us a few words about, you know, your track record. And you did hint to it already, but I think it's interesting for people to see, you know, how you know what happened to what did you sell and to whom. Again, I don't think we need the details of each and every name, right? But you know, to get us a feel of the sizes and of the players involved in your track record.
Sure. So we talked about the first one, embolic protection. This was a filter that you would place before you put a stent, so that when you do put a stent, you don't release emboli that goes and causes a stroke. The product was developed after we became aware of this industry, and there was a couple of different competitors. We just ended up with a better device that had a smaller profile, so it was able to be deliverable into the patient faster and easier. And Boston Scientific bought that company. You know, the deal was capped at 200, and we ended up getting very close to that full number. Sadra Medical was this percutaneous aortic valve. When we started that company, there was a company called PVT. As we were fundraising, they got bought by Edwards, and Edwards has turned this into a multi-billion-dollar business. Incredibly, sort of one of the most important developments in cardiology after the stents. And we identified this as a really interesting thing, and we said we could do better, and we came up with a very interesting product that avoided IP, but actually ended up allowing Boston Scientific, when they bought it, to sue Edwards and win on the IP that we had developed. Very different device. It allowed people to reposition it, and, you know, very interesting product. Maya Medical was the first company. You know, there was a company called Ardian that got sold to Medtronic. We had developed that product really quickly because we were working on something different. But when we saw what happened, we did a pivot, put the one company on ice. That was the company actually called Apama Medical, and then switched over to Maya. You know, all the investors invested in that new effort, and we sold it in 18 months. It was the second company after Ardian got sold to Medtronic. And then we did Kalila. That was sort of going in parallel. This was a steerable sheath for treating, you know, for electrophysiologists to use for treating various sort of, you know, mostly AFib, but it was an accessory that we sold to Abbott. And Abbott very quickly after when they merged. When they bought St. Jude, they ended up selling it to Terumo, and that's being sold by Terumo today. Apama Medical was sort of a company we started and put on hold, and then we raised money from institutional investors and sold rather quickly. This was a sophisticated RF balloon with cameras and software, and Boston Scientific acquired it. Nuvera Medical is the ultrasound company that we discussed. That one. We did a license agreement with GE. We took their sensor, put a catheter together, and then treated a few patients. Actually, this happened during COVID. We were supposed to do clinical studies. We had an early arrangement with J&J that if we hit the milestones, they'd acquire it. So we ended up only raising a single round of funding for this. So it was a great exit for the investors. And at one point during COVID, we were really afraid that we're going to sort of miss the timeline. But we ended up doing our first human cases remotely using Zoom. We didn't even go to the cases. We just shipped the catheters and used Zoom to proctor the physicians and do the case. And it turned out to be a great success, and they acquired it. So that's a quick overview of those products that we have done.
Awesome, Amr. Thank you so much. The last question I have before going to the wider group is about the existing companies. And there, Amr, there's two aspects that I would like you to tell us about. Maybe if I can ask you to pick one that you think you would like to describe to the team, and also if you could tell us a little bit about the potential timeline for exits, right? I think these are the two big features of this existing portfolio of companies of yours.
Sure. I mean, it's hard to be precise with an exit timeline. That's certainly a forecast. But as you get closer, those forecasts get more accurate. I'll describe Supera Medical. Supera is this is a heart pump. This is a percutaneous. It's a catheter-based temporary heart pump to support the patient if their heart is arrested during a procedure, or if they just suffered a major heart attack and their heart is barely able to pump. So when you put this pump, it takes over and it allows the heart to recover. Or the other scenario is they are being treated. They're trying to get a stent in that patient, but their situation is so difficult that they expect that they may end up with a heart attack during the procedure, and so they put the pump just in case, so that they can properly treat the patient in spite of a heart attack if it happens or not to happen, because the pump can, these really small pumps can take over and push 4 or 5 liters of blood per minute. So Supera is in this space, and there is one company that's doing this. They're very successful. They're worth, I think, $14 billion right now. It's a company called Abiomed. So the product's being sold for the last few years. These are very profitable, life-saving products, and this is the kind of thing we like to do. We don't do kind of aesthetics. The products we work on, and the reason we can sell them early is because they're sort of life-altering. And this one really fits this bill, right? It is this: if you don't have this product, you could die, right? Or you have the likelihood of dying is high. That's why people use this product, and also the technology is not that simple once you figure it out. Of course, the margins are really good, but the R&D effort is significant and technology is sophisticated. So these sell for $25,000, $30,000 per device, and they only get used once in the patient. They will be in the patient for a few hours in some cases during the procedure, or if it's a heart failure patient that needs support for a few days or a week or so, that's the other indication. So they're really short-term usage, and that's a lot of what we try to do, is those exciting products that where you have a high volume, but yet they have a big impact on patients. And so we want to be the fast follower to Abiomed. This is sort of the approach. Abiomed, that project, that effort, that company, has been around for 15 years plus. And so when they started, it took a long time for them to sort of figure out the clinical indication, to get the technology right, get the approvals, get the reimbursement, and all of that. It took many, many years. And when we saw what they were doing and how successful they were becoming, we quickly jumped onto this. There was a big barrier to entry with intellectual property, and we think we've resolved it in a really clever way. And now we have a company that looks very interesting. There's not a lot of companies that are in the running trying to compete with Abiomed. We're one of the key, one of the few. And so we expect that when we finish and get into the clinic and treat our first 20, 30, 40 patients, we could probably get sold. We expect that as a likelihood. And we have been talking to all the strategics, and they're all very, very interested. They want to invest with us, and so we keep talking to them, and we've raised $50 million for this company. We will be in the clinic probably in the first half of next year, and so we may raise one more round, or we may get sold, or we may decide to take the company public. All the options are available. It's a big market, very exciting sort of technology.
Great, Amr, thanks. You know my view on Supera, love it. Please make another round before the exit. I know you're an artist to find the right timeline for exits, but obviously as the fund, we love that opportunity. Excellent. Well, Amr, thank you so much. We've went through really the questions I wanted to ask to kind of set the stage and get everyone to understand. We've got a number of questions on the chat that I'll pass on to you, and there's a few we already talked about, so I'll just pass. But one question that came up twice is if you could tell a little bit about your percentage of failure. That's, I guess, how I would translate it, in your initial due diligence, right? People ask, how many companies did you close down in your initial due diligence process?
So what we do is, there's too many to count, because some projects we literally work on for a few weeks and we decide not to pursue them. And then there's a few that will go on for a couple of months, and there's one or two where we go for a year and stop. So it's, the ones that last a year, I think it's happened to us, twice. Most of the other ones happen really early and fast. So that's the rate. So there are more of the ones that are only a few weeks or a few months.
Okay, thank you for that. Another question that we have here is about identifying the potential buyers. Could you please tell us a little bit about that dynamic? The question also asks about, the competitive process. Is it like now I'm using that word, but an auction, et cetera, et cetera. And finally, about this question about the exit price. How do you land the right exit?
So let's start with the first one. So in the normal places that we have been historically, the buyers are easily identified. So for example, in cardiology, they're well known. It's Abbott, Boston Scientific, J&J, depending of course which segment, Edwards, and so forth. So there's only a few of them, like 5 of them. If you're talking electrophysiology, it's one set. If you're talking about the regular interventional cardiology and structural heart, it's a different set. But usually in each one of those, there's 4 to 6, and they're well known because they have a distribution network, right? They've acquired companies or built up companies over a long period of time. And when we develop a product, it has to fit. We're not usually trying to build a sales organization. We sell our companies prior to FDA approvals. So it's really easy for us to figure out who's selling in that product line and who are, and therefore by definition, they're really interested, because they have their biggest value, that one of the big values that the big companies have is this distribution network that's been established, the ability for them to do big pivotal studies and so forth. So selecting those companies, same thing with ophthalmology. We know who those are. And as we get into more interesting areas and new areas like robotics and digital health and so forth, the number of potential buyers increase. But you start certainly with the ones that we've described, and then now there's other players that could be interested in. And that's the kind of thing that we have to do as we dig into, do we want to do this project or that project? The second question you were asking, what was that?
It's the competitive, environment, and Nuvera, several buyers.
Environment is also rather simple. We make sure that we're talking to all the potential buyers, all the significant potential buyers, so that if somebody wants to make an offer, it's immediately sort of we reach out to the other ones, and we try to make sure that all the companies are on the same sort of level of information, so that if one of them makes a move, the others are able to make a bid and a counter bid. Yeah, we're always encouraging the sort of this bidding auction process. Sometimes it's formal, we will use investment bankers. Sometimes it's informal. And sometimes we think that, what, this party is really interested and they want to do it really early. And we will do a deal with them because we feel like it's the right thing. So there's not the recipe can change a little bit. We've sold a couple of companies because we had a hunch that if we work early and sell early and there's only one party, it's okay. And we've done that twice. But the bidding process, the knowledge that if those guys misbehave, that they will lose the deal and their competitors picks it up is really what keeps them honest. So even if there's not a bidding process, the competitive pressure sort of keeps things going the way they need to. And we are always, the key is to really keep talking to folks, and they know what our game is. Everybody knows that we're talking to everybody. So they, and people in general in our industry, there's not a lot of misbehaviors, at least not dramatic misbehaviors. There may be some intimidation here and there, but at the end of the day, they have to come back to groups like us or us to buy their next company. So there's an incentive to behave in a reasonable way. Yeah, that's
great. Thank you for this answer, Christian. I hope that answers your question. Someone has noticed, Amr, that Boston was the acquirer 3 times. Anything you'd like, can you tell us a little bit about that? Is there a specifically strong relationship with them?
Well, it's, once you sell a company, the first company, to one of the strategics, you end up knowing those folks more than you know the others, and right, that makes it easier to sell another company. The harder thing is to actually sell to other companies, and now have and we've succeeded in doing that. So I'm very happy that we have multiple buyers. Boston in general is a big buyer. This is how they grow. So they're usually more active than the others. But all of them have to buy. So this is not unique to Boston, obviously, and that's why we've been able to sell to Abbott and to J&J, and we had multiple bids for a number of our companies, and it's just Boston ended up winning, and they were more aggressive. We do have a good relationship with all the companies. We've had bid from all, I would say, so we've sold to 3 companies, but we've had bids from 5 or 6.
Wow. Okay.
More.
That's great. Thanks. I hope that answers Paul's question. Thank you, Paul. FDA approval. What can you tell us, Amr, about that? Where with the companies that you develop.
So in medical devices, what matters more than anything else is knowing that the product works, right? It's not like drugs. Drugs, sometimes you can do a big study and find out at the end that it didn't work, and it's none of your fault, or it's not the team, technical team that didn't know. It's just the physiology didn't really work to your favor. Sometimes you can't anticipate adverse events. In the medical device space, it's a bit more predictable because you know the method of action, and especially the kinds of product we select to pursue, they're sort of life-altering. So you don't need to do a 1,000-patient study to know that you have a good valve, right? You will know for the first few patients that this is going to work. So people can, once they see the clinical cases, especially if the product is sort of significantly life-altering, has a big effect, then they can make the acquisition because they know when they do the pivotal study, it's going to work out. Other things may change, priorities may change, other technologies may come, but the likelihood of success, or at least the risk from their perspective, is worth it. And so that's that's why they don't necessarily need to have a full FDA approval. Now, of course, if you have a full FDA approval, that's great because you're going to increase the value of the company. The problem is it's going to take longer. You're going to have to raise more money, get some more dilution, and then because of that, longer to return to the investors. So historically, we haven't, we would rather sell early as opposed to wait an extra 3 or 4 or 5 years. Some products will take 10 years, and that's just a long time for us to wait for that full FDA approval. Now, the environment is changing for the better in that there are, the options of going public and so forth. So there is more support for companies. If you can go the long way, it could be interesting. But I think from a sort of timing perspective, selling early and not having to wait for the FDA and just showing good clinical data, that is enough to convince the big companies to buy early.
Thank you. Another question, Amr, how many companies are in the due diligence phase right now, apart from the 6 existing ones that we have in our pipeline?
So right now we're actively, so there's one company that's further along than the others. We're building prototypes, we're talking to physicians, and that's making rapid progress. And then there's 3 or 4 other ones that are in the early stages of identifying sort of, what the technology is, and why it's interesting. So we have, say, 5 projects ongoing right now.
Okay, thank you. The last question that I'd like to read it's a very short one. What are the risks? If I may add my own twist to it, if you could talk about the risks, Amr, of course, but also about the key man risk, please.
Sure. So the risks are, I would say, in our industry, things can change. You could have a clinical study that gives you data that's not as interesting as you thought it would be, and therefore the interest from the strategic buyers could diminish. So that's one of the risks. You could have a technical challenge that takes longer to resolve, which this is another risk. So the risks I would say are typical of startups. There's technical risks, there's the environment or sort of market risk, and I would consider the clinical study is somewhat out of your control. Things don't work, they don't work. So those are the kinds of risks that exist in our industry. We try to control that with what we do, but it is still, the risk goes down to 0, that's for sure. And as far as my role, I play the role of chairman for all the companies. So their companies are running independently there's a CEO for each one of them. And that's a really important thing we do. We spend a lot of time identifying the right people to run our companies. And the way we structure Shifamed is that we have a G&A function that's run by myself and a close team of really experienced people like a CFO, VP of HR, and we have a business person with Miriam, and then we have a CTO, we have an IP attorney on the inside. So all of those sort of G&A functions are taken care of and certainly facilitate fundraising and so forth. The CEOs that are running the companies are usually they're oriented towards technical skills and background and clinical skills. So they really know their projects really well, they know their industry really well, and they build their teams and they run their projects. So each company is independent. They have, they're not always the same investors or different levels of investment from a similar group of investors. So they're independently run Delaware corporations, and that allows us to sort of keep things going. Each of the teams, our success and failures are, they live and die by them. The equity comes directly from what they do, and so their motivations are super high. If one company does well, the others don't necessarily see anything from it. There's no shared sort of benefit. We really need to keep the teams sort of very motivated, very empowered, and able to focus, take their risks in areas that they need to. So this is how we manage the process. So I don't have to be in the companies and running them. I don't, but I'm part of the sort of regular board meetings. I meet with the team We usually there's a lot of peer management. The CEOs talk to each other, and I get together with all the CEOs once a week.
Perfect. Amr, I just want to, one last question that I think is very nicely related to risk, is about cardio versus ophthalmology and how the competition, acts. If you could make it short, just so you know, the background of that question is, for instance, in Switzerland or Europe, right? There's a lot of startups in the ophthalmology space. Is that a threat?
Well, usually we're in competitive spaces, so we don't have a problem. I mean, if a space is competitive, it means it's active. It means people want to be in that area. So that's not a problem for us. We try to move, and we usually typically move faster than others. So we welcome competition. It's just an indication of how interesting this space is. So that's a good thing, not a bad thing from our perspective. Because we're not going to move forward unless we think we have an advantage. We do our homework. If we think we have an advantage, then we move forward. And we are, because we're interested in these big sort of spaces, and there are multiple buyers and players, they need the products and they need to grow. So they're looking for the next sort of innovation to fill their portfolios. The high-end products, the ones that are doing what the current product, often in our industry, if a product has been on the market for a while, it becomes a commodity and the prices go down. So what we're doing to these products, especially the ones that have been around for a while, is really giving another level of features or better clinical outcomes that allows the companies to charge more for it, because patients need it and they're willing to pay for it. And so that's the case for both ophthalmology and cardiology. Now cardiology, and also you can see we have more companies in the cardiology space. It's just because for us, there's usually more competition, more acquisitions taking place, and it's just a bigger space in general for us and the kind of procedures that we like to work in. And that's the answer to that question.
Yeah, well, Amr, thank you so much, for your time, but also for being such a great partner. It's so much fun and it's so inspiring to work with you. So thanks for your time today and all the time, to take us through this great story. I want to kind of conclude here, just a couple of bullet points. So you see that we have access to a truly awesome set of assets. Many of you have heard me say that. What I think is also very special here is that the risk, in our view, is as controlled as we can think of, right, in this particular space. We see your due diligence process, Amr, as de-risking a lot of the risks, et cetera, right? So, we're very excited about all this. Again, the fund is going to be launched on September 1st. The subscription period is going to start on September 1st. So stay tuned with that. Again, I want to thank Amr and anybody who dialed in. There'll be a replay, so some of you will listen to this a little bit later, but thank you very much for your time, and we'll be in touch for sure.